Hello and welcome to Off the Roll. I'm your host, Troy Hirschman. Today we have part 2 of Ken Wolfert, Deep Roots. Ken's going to talk about his time away from Miami, sports medicine clinic, short career and a high school short career, but again, why he left Miami when he did, a little bit about Providence College and some more about kind of what he was doing after retirement. Again, all interesting stuff. And I think it's important, I'm going to kind of get on my soapbox here a little bit, but why, one of the things I haven't explained is why am I doing this? And I think that the biggest point is that there are a lot of great athletic trainers out there or great people connected to athletic training that their stories are just as important as what gets reported at the national level or the district level or the state level of athletic trainers that are recognized. And not saying that Ken hasn't been recognized, he certainly has, but I think it's important to note that these stories kind of weave a connection with our history. And I think it's important that we understand where our history came from, the Otho Davises and the Mel Blinckenstaffs and the Bill Chambers and Marge Allbaums, all significant contributions to the profession of athletic training to get us to the point where we're at today. And I think these podcasts are part of telling that story. I think that's very important. So hopefully you have found some interest in this, and we can continue on with telling a lot of people's stories that may have some interesting connections involved with them. So let's go off the roll. Ken Wolfert, part 2.
Where they didn't have it before. And that's what the clinic did to me, for me. I had 10 high schools identified in the Hamilton, Middletown area outside of Oxford that were ripe for that kind of help, creating something. So we did. That's what we want to do. Then, I didn't have those late practices to cover stuff like that, so I could go watch. And what happened one day, I'm in work, still at work, and I get a call. It wasn't. I went to the high school game on Friday night. And I'm sitting with my mother-in-law and Pat, and we're watching. And our son Mike is the quarterback, and he gets thrown down and he breaks his wrist right there.
Right.
And epiphyseal fracture, growth plate. And so got to leave, take him to the hospital. The orthopedic surgeon, the guy's friends of ours, in that group that I'm working for, comes down, sets it, does the whole thing. That's on a Friday night. On Monday, now Matt, he's a junior instead of a senior. He was a junior and sophomore. So Matt was a sophomore. He was like the defensive back and punter and kickoff return and flanker and wide receiver. His brother was the quarterback. Well, Matt was even a better athlete. So the coaches said, well, we want you to be the quarterback. So in the JV game is on Monday, you're going to be the quarterback on Monday. Yeah. Now I'm at work, get another call. Matt hurt his shoulder. And so I could leave work, go down there. Well, He has a epiphyseal growth fracture right here in his shoulder, for crying out loud. And he was I guess he was a sophomore or junior. Yeah, I remember. Yeah, sophomore. And so, but I got to be there.
Right. And
he's sitting on the bench there with somebody, a coach in there, what's the matter? He's holding it. So I got to see both those injuries there. My sons were right there. If I was working in Miami, I'd be on a road trip on Friday somewhere, worrying about that.
Yep.
Monday, I don't know, who knows where. But I got to do that. So if nothing else, that was what I had hoped to be able to see that and enjoy it. Now, just fast forward a little bit. A couple of years after that, the sports medicine clinic folded after 3 years.
Right.
It was probably the worst time in the early 80s. The payment schedule from therapy was down. The unemployment was up. Interest rates were really high, 20%.
Oh, yeah.
And those doctors were like losing money here, because they weren't patient enough. We had to build this reputation a little bit faster, but not fast enough for them.
Right.
So they said, we have to quit. We have to close down. So we were Jerry Whetstone was my assistant at that time, somebody else, a woman. And we all were out of job. What a humbling experience to have to go to unemployment line and collect a check and show them, I tried for these jobs and this job.
Wow.
Stay in line, but we did. And Jerry had two young kids. My kids were getting behind college level. He had them come along. And Mercy Hospital was going to take over the remnants of what the clinic was developing, but they could only hire one person, so we decided Jerry was the person. I have a better chance of finding something.
Right.
And so I did. I found a job at a high school around there called Lakota High School, which is a large school in the greater Cincinnati area. But it was only going to be a one-year job because the guy was going to get his master's somewhere because he had to get, by that time, the state of Ohio was requiring athletic trainers to be more professional, so he wasn't. So I got to do that job. But what happened was I'm covering that Lakota High School was against Talon High School, where my son Matt was now a senior, and he was a big stud.
Yeah.
And that was the most worrisome, scary feeling I ever had because I'm working with these Lakota guys, and they're better. Lakota's a bigger school. And they're looking at their scouting report. And they go, there's a Wolfert on this team here. Yeah, I said, I want you to make sure you don't hurt that guy because these guys are good and they were teasing and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But then we went, it was in Oxford, and I had to be on the other sideline and watch what was going on. Unfortunately, thank God, Matt didn't get hurt.
Yeah.
He had a good game. They didn't win, but they were presentable.
I just had that experience myself with my daughter. You know, we had a volleyball game at Eastern Hancock, and Blue River came to Eastern Hancock, and she goes, "Dad, what are you going to wear?" And I said, "Well, for your game, the JV game, I'll have a Blue River shirt on, and I'll be in the stands cheering you on. After that game, when you're not playing on the varsity team, I got to put my Eastern Hancock shirt on. I'm going to go down and sit where I sit for that." But it was a surreal experience because I'm in the place that I work at. I know everybody on that Eastern team. Those girls knew my daughter played volleyball there, and they were kind of like, "How good is she? What are they going to do?" And I'm like, "I'm not telling you guys that stuff. Come on." And Blue River was not better than Eastern, and but she was more worried about what I was going to wear for that game than she was about whether she was going to play well or not or something like that. But I get that. I mean, it is a surreal experience.
And Pat was nervous as could be, because and these guys, they had this scouting report. They knew that Matt was one of the guys they had to target. And I'm going, just be easy about this. So in the end, it was all, they all have, hello and congratulate each other at the end of the game. Yeah. But then on Monday or something, I think it was Monday of the next week or Tuesday, I'm in the high school, the Lakota High School training, and Matt is going to take a physical at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base because he had an appointment to the Air Force Academy. Right. That he had to go as part of the job that he had to go. So after he's done with that physical, he drove down to where I was at the high school. Right. Came into training room and saw these guys now getting ready for practice, and there was Matt. And they're all, now you're all buddies because you played against each other. Yeah, exactly. But the tension up to that point was like, oh, I don't know if I can stand it. But it was an opportunity that I would never had if I had been stayed at Miami. You just had, that was your job. Yeah. And it had to do that. So I don't regret it a bit. I had a chance during that same off period of time to put in more time with Larry Starr with the Cincinnati Reds. Right. At those days, they didn't have strength and conditioning coaches, but they had been one of the first ones to buy into Nautilus equipment that they had. And we had that at Miami. So anyway, Larry got me a job as what they called conditioning supervisor. That was my title on the bill. And so I got to go to, I didn't go on travel with them, but I went to the home games. and it was a great opportunity for that. And actually, when I left, the guy that we hired to take my place was one of the assistant coaches at Lakota High School. He stayed there for many years in that job. And he was more of a strength kind of guy than me. I was just, prevention of injuries. And it wasn't like... they didn't like that. Baseball did not like that. Bob Housen was the president of the club, and he got talked into that, and he didn't want that. And he would come down once in a while and say, "I don't understand this stuff. It's going to hurt people." And Babe Ruth never had this. And
so you're going to hand him a bottle of whiskey and say, "Go stay out all night"? Is that what makes baseball players?
What are you talking about? If Babe Ruth had done this, maybe he would have hit 900 home runs. Who knows? But the Reds didn't want to embrace it. But all the visiting teams did. When they came in, they were looking for a place to work out because the Dodgers or the Houston or whoever it was, these guys were would come in and, can I use the room? Fernando Valenzuela was a great pitcher.
Right. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And he was a pitcher. And everybody was saying, oh, well, the arms and throwing, and it's going to. He was a believer in that, a big believer in that. And all the Reds players were like, seeing these guys go back down in there. Well, there must be something to do this. And Johnny Bench was in his last year that year, in '83, and he came sneaking in there one time when there was nobody around, and he's back by the bathroom. He says, got anything you can do to strengthen my forearms and my wrists and my hands, and and yeah, sure, we can do, And he's really secretive about it. He didn't want anybody to see him in there.
Yeah.
And I said, well, we got some other things you could do for your core and all
that. Yeah.
No. I just want to know what I can do with this. And it was his last year.
Hey, did you get an autograph when you're done?
Yeah.
So there you go. You did that. You helped that out a little bit. Yeah. You can still sign autographs.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
He was down in New Albany when he was speaking down there, and he could sign an autograph. So you helped out. You helped out so he could get his hands stronger to hold the pencil and pen.
He signed a lot of autographs.
I don't know. This is something that I don't think it's a big story, but Larry Starr always said that Johnny Bench they diagnosed him with some TB, a little spot of tuberculosis on his lungs, somewhere in the early part of the middle of his career. And, so he was out of action a while. He lost a lot of weight. And Larry, just to this day, I think he still would say that he didn't ever thought he ever recovered from that. He never got back. He didn't get the bulk back that he had, the burliness and stuff like that. But then they didn't have weight training either. He could have. He didn't do anything. So maybe his career was shortened a little bit because he never got back that strength. So at the end, like a lot of the catchers, they couldn't play all the time. He'd play first base and then catch once a week. And so he was still a great catcher, but he couldn't recover the next day from that. Right. Or the couple of days. So he'd have to go first base. But that last game of his career, he was a catcher. And, right away somebody got a hit and wanted to steal on him, and he fired it down, and that guy was out. And, he just still had it. Yeah. And he had a home run in his last game. He was great, but, he couldn't recover from a game of catching for a week after that. Yeah. Because it just took too much out of him. Right. But, that's just a
So who were some of in that time that you were at Miami? There's still quite athletic trainers that came out of that program. I mean, who was some of the more, if you can remember, who were some of the more prominent athletic trainers that came out of that program when you were there?
Well, I think most of the ones we had were high school kind of people, that went on. But I think, my first assistant, of course, was Jack, and then Jack, but I didn't really, only had him 1 year. But then I had a guy named of Ron Reberick. And Ron Reberick was a student. He was one of the 3 students that I had with Jack. And then he stayed all the way through. And then when Ed Chrisman came, he was not one of my students, but he was at Ohio University. Right. He went to William & Mary. And then Ron came on for 3 or 4 years, and he went to University of Central Florida as the head trainer. So he was the first head trainer there. They didn't have a program. So that guy started. And, so then after that, we had a guy named Mark Nierengarden, but he went into academics, he PhD, and he was teaching up in Minnesota somewhere. And then we had Gail Newton. Yeah. Gail was a GA for me first. He came as a GA for club and intramural sports. But then any GAs that I got, they all work football. I don't care. You weren't just going to be intramural people. Because that was what I would say to him. You don't want to just be worried about those intramural things. You're here to learn something more than that. So then he stayed. He was the GA, and then he went back out to Montana, and he stayed there until Mark Nierengarden left, and I asked him to come back, and then he stayed on until I left, and he took my place. So we had them, but the other guys under that, like Tom Agnew, you probably don't know his name, but he became a trainer at Ohio Wesleyan. Brant McFarland went to Kent State. I can't even remember him. Well, one guy, you know, but he didn't go into athletic training for very long after that. But you remember Tom Rockovitz?
Okay, yeah.
Sold athletic training products.
Right.
You know, and he was a GA at Central Michigan, but then he decided, in those days, in those 70s, it was like, I think he got to be drinking too much and doing other stuff, and he had to find his way, and he went out to California. He did, he found his way back, and he became a great salesman for our athletic training people. They loved him. You know, he was an innovative, creative kind of guy, enthusiastic. But he was one of my early students, and I was proud of him as any of those guys. But Jeff and Kathy Ciolik, they were together in class. They got married. They both became athletic trainers. He went to he was the head trainer at Fullerton International. Okay. And he did that, but he ended up, both of them were physical therapists. They ended up at the Cleveland Clinic and had their careers there. Tarkio Chester was a physical therapist after there, but he stayed in that, and he helped on the local areas, you know, with those people. But then one of the one of my GAs was Ralph Reef. And,
I was going to say, where was Ralph in there?
We were real proud of Ralph. It was a great. We had several of them. Tony Salisi, who was the Pitt basketball trainer for a long time, and they were probably in the same class. But several of those GAs, I can't even remember who all they are, but the Ciolix and Tony Incorvaya, he went to Syracuse and then to Pitt after Tony and took his job, and he's still in Pittsburgh, but he's not doing athletic training. A guy named Ted Shook, he was the guy in my class, if you remember, that was in hockey. He was the hockey player on the club team. He left a year or two later. He was like trying to be a coach somewhere, and he called and said, "I want to be an athletic trainer." You know, we didn't have anything at Miami at graduate level or anything going on, but I said, he's up in Cleveland. I said, "Why don't you, I'll put you in touch with my friend Don Lowe, who was at Kent then still, and maybe he can get something going," because they had some GAs up there and we didn't. And so he did. He became a certified athletic trainer, became the head trainer at a little school around Cleveland. Then he went to Syracuse. Don brought him to Syracuse, and he was an assistant at Syracuse. And then he went to Providence College and was the hockey trainer, just a hockey trainer at Providence College. And then that job opened up when I was at the high school at Lakota. Right. And they said, we need some, Ted knew about this, and Don knew about it, because Don knew the guy that was doing the headhunting, because he was a guy who had got his PhD at Syracuse. And so they invited me to go over there, and all that rest was history. I stayed on there. But Ted was so I was the coordinator of the program. He was the hockey guy. He left after, I was there, I don't know, 4 or 5 years later. He became the head trainer for the New Jersey Devils. Oh my goodness! Okay. Stanley Cup. He got a couple rings from the Stanley Cup. Now Ted has since passed away, but that's a great story, because he was just this guy in his class who needed a couple scraps of tape. Later on, he ends up do that, and it's pretty good. But I'm probably forgetting. No, that's fine. I mean, that brings us to the point of Providence College, and so how long were you at Providence College? About 18. 18 years. So were you around when Rick Pitino was there? Yeah. Played racquetball with him. But he was such a competitor. He'd never give a point up. No matter what it is. He'd get mad, but he was a fair guy as far as the rest of it went. He was a hardworking guy. And one of the things that was really nice, before he left, or about the time he was leaving, I remember he stopped me and he said, he knew Mike and Matt by that time. They were in college. But they'd come back in the summer and work around the ticket office and hang around, and stuff. And he says, he had some young boys that were coming up, younger family. When he lost a boy at birth, shortly after birth, and I remember going to that funeral. But he had this other guy, Rick, who became the basketball coach at Minnesota. And New Mexico. Those little guys were hanging around. So, but Mike and Matt were a generation older. But he said to me one time, he says, if my boys can grow up to be like those guys of yours, I'd be feeling really successful about that. And that was one of the nicest things that he could have said. But he went, he was he took took over this program, and he saw this motley group that they had. They were a Big East team, but they were slow and not. They had a coach who should have been retiring, who had been very successful, Joe Mulaney. And Joe Mulaney was the head coach of the Lakers, and they won an NBA after he was at Providence College. And he had, but at the end he was in recruiting, and he had a guy named Billy Donovan, who was his point guard. And Billy was kind of a pudgy guy, slow point guard. Yeah. And he was getting eaten up by these. I was watching those games my first year there, and I thought, wow. So he came in and he looked at all these guys, and he said, to Donovan, he says, you got to lose 35 pounds if you're going to play for me, but it was the right thing to say to a guy like that, because, oh, really? Nobody ever told him that. And he did. He went and did everything he had. That one guy, I come in at 7:45 in the morning, and he'd be waiting for me to turn the lights on in the gym in there, or he'd be in there in the dark, dribbling, and then I'd turn him on. Practice. He changed from the blob to a pretty successful point guard in his senior year. They went to the Final Four. Right. And he was the difference. They had a guy named Delray Brooks from Indiana that transferred in, and he was a great shot, but he was slow at the trigger. And Billy could get that ball to him so fast before the defense could get on, he could get a shot away. So after Billy graduated, Delray Brooks was on his own the next year. He was not nearly as good because couldn't feed him the ball as fast as Billy Donovan did. Anyway, but those guys, he had a great pedigree because he had all these assistant coaches that were with him. He brought in that I forgot their names. The guy, Van Gundy was a GA, and
I think. Who's the guy at Kentucky? Wasn't Cal? Yeah, wasn't Calipari an assistant on that team?
No, no.
Okay,
no, he wasn't. In fact, I think Cal. I forgot the exact title, but Patino went to UMass, University of Massachusetts.
Maybe that's where it was.
At the same time, what's his name? The great Doc.
Dr. J.
Dr. J.
Yeah.
They played on that same team.
Okay.
But then I think Calipari then went and either coached there later on after Patino, and there was always this rivalry between those two. But he went to when he left, he went to the Knicks, and just for a brief time. But he liked Billy Donovan so much, he drafted him so he could have some pedigree to say he was in the NBA. He wasn't an NBA caliber player, but he sat on the bench and practiced and everything. And then he went to Kentucky, and he took him with him to Kentucky, continue on as a GA there, helping him before he went to Marshall and then to Florida. Right. And so, but he's Stu Jackson, who was an enforcer for the NBA. He was a GA at that time. What's the guy? Oh, my gosh, he's one of my favorite guys. I've forgotten, but he came from Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh, and he was a GA. Herb Sendrick. Right. Oh, yeah. Herb Sendrick.
Who ended up at Miami.
He ended up in Miami, but he was also at Clemson and in Arizona, University of Arizona, or Arizona State, one of those. But Herb was one of the classiest guys. But there was a whole bunch of those guys. And then he left, and there was some guy named Gordy Chiesa who fell flat on his face. But then Rick Barnes came in. Yeah. And Rick Barnes was a great recruiter, and he had all kinds of NBA prospects who went on and played in the NBA for a number of years until he left. And then we had Pete Gillen, who came, another guy from Xavier. Right. He went on to Virginia after that, but. So there was a whole line of really good coaches in the basketball program, and but we had my program there was by that time I had made the turn. I had made two turns in athletic training. One was at Miami when I got away from the day-to-day grind of that training room into a clinic. Saw a little high school, a little pro stuff. Then I went. The guy who hired me to go there to Providence his name is Lou Lamoriello, and he's a hockey guy. And he was the guy who went to the Devils and created that. Now he's with Long Island, the Islanders. He's the GM president.
Okay.
Runs that whole program. But he was a really sharp guy, and his dream, and that's what sold me on it. We had this Ted Shook, the trainer.
Yeah.
He picks me up. Interview. We're going to interview on Monday. Sunday night, flying to Providence, and he picks me up in the gate, and he says, "Oh well, little Amarillo's out in the car." And this is Sunday night. I'm just casual coming in there, and I'm prepared for an interview, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And I get in the car, and there's and he says, "Okay, we'll go to the restaurant somewhere up there." So like 10:30 at night, and so we sit down and we talk till almost 3:00 in the morning. Me and Lou,
yeah.
And he's describing what he wants there. He says, "We want excellence in our program, our sport, and all the programs." That's the way I don't care what it is, but we want it. We don't want any sags. He says, "We got a pillar here for hockey and men's basketball and men's hockey, and the rest of it's like this right now."
Right.
And he says, "I want all the standards to be up here, covering all the sports the same way." And I said to Lou, "That's going to cost some money to do all that." "Well, that's why I want to hire somebody that'll tell me how to do that."
Yeah.
I said, "Really?" He said, "Every other AD I ever had said, you have this much to do and this much resources to do it with. I don't care how you do it, just do your magic tricks and don't bother me." And that's what we all feel.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But he says, I said, "Say what?" In other words, yeah. He says, "You have to tell me what it costs and I'll hold you to it." Well, geez, I never thought I'd ever hear a administrator tell me that.
Yeah, exactly.
That he wants to build up all these other sports because he's got his two main sports covered. We got a full-time person in both of those. But all these other sports, I don't know how many we had, were just covered sloppily with little or nothing. We didn't have a facility that was really that good, so we're going to have to build a facility. We're going to have to get supplies. We've got to get personnel.
Right.
We don't have a student trainer program. They're a private school, liberal arts.
Right.
The farthest thing in their mind is something like that. They a small school, 3,000 students.
Yeah.
And but he says, "Well, I think it could be done if it's done if you see a goal and you can put it out there and set it up." Okay. And so I said, so it was like the next day you're going to walk around and see all the people and everything else. And 8:00, and at night we go to the restaurant and meet with the guys that took me around all day. We're sitting around, and I was really impressed up there. I thought it was a fall. I was still working at the high school, Lakota High School, and that athletic director was real nice to let me go and go visit. And I'm up there, and he goes, I called Pat and I said, "Pretty nice up here." She didn't come along,
right?
And I said, so at night. So then here comes Louie, and after we're done eating, pretty much in this other restaurant, and he goes, "Come on over here by the table." So how'd it go today? Because I probably didn't even see him the whole day, passing. And he says, "So do you like it?" And I said, "Yeah, I thought it was pretty good." He says, "Well, how'd you like to have the job?" And I said, "What?" I was just coming up on a fluke to just have a good time. See Ted, my old friend Ted.
Yeah, exactly.
I've never been up there for much. I mean, it was in Boston a few times. But
yeah,
okay. I said, "Pat, he wants to know about, he used to ask me a job." I told him, I said, "I got a job right now. I can't lead these football players."
Right.
And he says, "Well, take your time." He says, I said, "Might be after Thanksgiving." "Well, just let me know. Go home and think about it. And if that's what it takes, that's what you do." So I went home. He says, "Get yourself a camera or something, take some pictures or postcards and everything else, pamphlets." And I took them all home and laid them on the table. So I think, yeah, you might like them. It's a pretty nice community here. Yeah. We don't know anybody but Ted, but let's try it. And she says, "Yeah, let's do it." Yeah. So Mike was a freshman at IU, Matt was a senior, and Dan was like in the first grade. So it was a good time to make a break because he's going to go to college, Matt, next year. So two of them will be in college. Right. One here is just too young to know anything yet. He can move out, and he grew up in the East. Right. So she didn't come out until late February or something. And by the time she came out for a visit, it was stark and cold. And no trees on trees. So I was there in the fall in New England. It was beautiful. Yeah. Beautiful. She comes in, there's snow on the ground, it's cold and frigid. And I thought, she's going to hate this. You know what I mean? That picture I painted was so nice. This is so bad.
Oh, my gosh.
But she's a good sport, and she said, yeah, we can do that. And so we stayed all those years,
Yeah.
And, but at that point it was more of an administration job. I went there knowing that I wasn't going to be in the field. I took baseball for the first couple of years, and I got to know the Big East guys, and they were a lot of fun to be around. And then toward my end, I was going with soccer. So I did along with soccer, and went again to all the Big East schools, Notre Dame, West Virginia, Georgetown. So I had a pretty good time. But for the most part, I was in charge of the equipment room and the strength training program, the athletic training, and travel. So I had a bunch of administrative things. How you become assistant athletic director.
Right. Yeah.
Thing. Yeah. And but that was all right because I could control my time. I didn't have to be anywhere because I had to promise her when we went out there that I wouldn't just leave her an orphan.
Right.
Just work all the time, and she'd be by herself and with the little boy, Dan. And so I had to be fair about that. And she was more than fair. She accepted all that, and we lived it up out there. We did everything we could in New England. And, went skiing. We went to Canada. We went to New York City all the time. It was only 2.5 hours.
Right.
We just did so much there, more than some of the people that lived there that never got to do that. We're going to get that someday. We never did.
Right.
But we enjoyed thoroughly the 20 years or so that we were up there.
Yeah.
And and that was it. So. But the transition, I was going to say earlier, I had like 3 careers. The athletic training lasted about 40 years. About 20 into that, halfway through and so on, we became interested in doing more with our faith, our Christian faith. And we discovered accidentally or by divine providence something about these Franciscans. There was a Franciscan group of laity, people that were not religious, they weren't priests or nuns.
Right.
They were just the local people. And we got a calling to that. And so that was a career that we became professed Secular Franciscans. And since 92, 94, we started in 92 and then 94. And we've done that for 30 years for that. So 40 years for athletic training, 30 with that. And that took over a lot more of the time for the athletic training. And then when we moved to Florida in 2004, in 2005, we moved to our community we're at now called Sun City Center. And right away, there's this signs up on you're driving along, it says, help needed, emergency squad. Sun City Center, emergency squad, volunteer emergency squad. And I was ignoring that, basically.
Yeah.
Like Burma shave, Burma shave, And Pat's going, we ought to look into that. See, she did all 3 things. The athletic training, she agreed with that taping of the ankle.
Yeah.
Number 2, I get the flyer in church one day about this second, and I'm going, we're busy about our own things at church. We have our own thing. She's teaching. She's in faith formation. I was serving. I was a trainer of the servers and district Eucharistic minister. And then I had my own job. She had her jobs.
Right.
And Danny was still at home. And this meets once a month down in Providence. It's about 13 miles into town. Once a month. And I'm thinking, there's no way she's going to laugh at this. This is what I got. Somebody laid it on my lap today at Mass. And she says, well, we ought to take a look at that, the 3 of us. Really? I mean, why would you be interested in that? You're busier than I am at that other church.
Yeah.
But we did. The good Lord sent us in that direction. We go down there, we see these emergency room signs, emergency squad, and she says, we got to do this. She's nagging at me about that. Why don't we go in and see what it's all about? Oh, boy. So we did. We made an appointment. They told us about it. Oh, the 2 of you could be on the same team because they have 8 teams and they run ambulances 365, 7, 24/7, 365. And okay, I signed up to be a first responder. She did, but I'll be the driver. I'll go on and become an ambulance driver at the beginning. So we were on the same little team together, the same crew. So we did that together. Now I'm in the field with her. Yeah. Doing that. It's just like me at home, coming home for supper, and no other football players got hurt today. And, well, no, we're traveling around to calls or get calls around town. And there, at that time, we had 6,000 calls a year, like 500 a month. Now, most of them were, I fall and can't get up.
Yeah.
But you don't know, once in a while, we had like at least a half a dozen CPR issues.
Right.
And we only saved one out of those. And, it's a thing that you really get a different kind of team focus. There's 40-some people on our team, team one. There's 8 teams, and we're this group. And we had shifts, so we'd work 12-hour shifts, sometimes 15-hour shifts, but overnight.
Yeah.
But we did that together for 4 or 5 years. Then she hurt her back and couldn't keep it, and then she became some assistant chief or assistant captain. And then I got called to be the deputy chief. And then I was elected as chief, and I couldn't handle that. My mother was dying. Pat's back had to have surgery up in the Mayo Clinic, and so I dropped out of that and just did maintenance. And, and bought the things for him, supplies and stuff like that. So basically, those were the three careers. Emergency medicine was the last one. Athletic training was the first one. The second one was the religious, and that goes on. Both of those go on.
Yeah.
Athletic training stopped, and here we are.
I think it's interesting that as athletic trainers, we start out very busy in our younger careers, and we're trying to build our careers. We spend a lot of time doing different types of things. Sometimes you get paid, sometimes you don't. That's kind of the way it works. If you spend all this time being an athletic trainer, then when you slow down or you do something different, shift gears, change what we're doing, we have all this grandiose plan that we're going to do whatever we want to do in the aspect of I'm going to go do this, or I'm going to travel, or I'm going to do this. And inevitably we find ourselves doing stuff again that's helping people. One of the things that when I left Ball State, retired from Ball State, and then decided to do this last winter, I was kind of sitting around being bored, and my wife goes, "Hey, they need substitute teachers at Blue River. Why don't you go apply and do that?" Well, I spent the whole spring subbing because they needed help subbing teachers. So my mornings, here I had all this, I'm going to start this project, I'm going to do the X, Y, and Z. And no, I'm at the school subbing. Yeah, exactly. And
that's
so.
That's why you were called.
Yeah.
That's where you are.
Yeah.
It's always, you probably said the same thing. There was people came in there. It takes a certain individual that wants to do this because they're giving everything back to somebody else.
Right.
You're going to be in the shadows. You're not going to be the first.
Even Neil has been like, you've been busier than busy. I mean, between...
Yeah, I had time to work.
Right. But it's like you really care for the other person more than yourself.
Right.
Okay? And not everybody's like that. They all want to have their praises sung instead of just be in the background, be happy with their success. And I may have a little something to do with that, and that's fine. If they thank you, fine.
Yeah.
I'm not in it for that, and we're not in it for the money, obviously. But the good Lord takes care of those kind of things. I believe I was taken out there to Providence to learn the concept, and I've told you this before, divine providence. I didn't know anything about it. I'm so thick-headed about, I'm in control, I'm going to do this and do this.
Right.
That I had to go to a place that's called Providence College in the city of Providence, Rhode Island. So how many times in a day do I have to answer Providence College, athletic department, or sports medicine, or whatever it is?
You're right, yeah.
How many times do I have to write the address, Providence College, Providence, Rhode Island? It was like an assignment the teacher would say, do not swear. Do not swear. So write that about 20 times, I won't do that. So God is saying, I want you to know about this divine providence.
Yeah.
I have something to do with these things that are happening in your life.
Right.
These doors that are opening, or these people you met, or whatever it might be. And I had nothing to do with that. Me, personally.
Right.
It was all somebody else. And that was why that concept of divine providence that was why I went there. 20 years I lived in that area. And and I'll never forget that. But I didn't know it going in. All I knew that it was a Catholic school, and I was intrigued by that. I thought there was a chance I could go to Mass daily. It would be convenient, would be easy. There'd be Mass. I was hoping. I didn't even know that. It turned out that it was.
Right.
And then I found that vocation for the Franciscans in the midst of the Dominicans. They were Dominican order. And they have the third order of Dominicans, but I never heard of it. But I heard about the Franciscans right in the midst of that.
Right.
And I was led to be, that's what it had to be. And we went on and became very busy in that. And this year was the first time we were on our regional board. the state of Florida, Georgia, and Alabama. I was the formation director. She was the secretary for our board. She had 2 terms of 3 years terms. I had 1 3-year, and we're both moved on from that. But,
right.
But we got to the leadership of all those 3 areas. I mean, it was that whether it was athletic training or you just get called and sucked into it. Don't want to do it, yeah, but nobody else is going to do it. And the next thing you know, you're doing more than you want to do, and you're regretting it. Why is this? Why is this?
Right. Yeah.
And I holler about it more than she did because she was a silent sufferer. And where I was a vocal sufferer, and but again, it's I think I'm very grateful certainly to Al Hart for what he did and to the people he introduced me to along the way that were tremendous. I had opportunities when Bobby Barton was president of the NATA. He asked me if I wanted to be the journal editor of the journal. And no, I'm not a literary person. I mean, I didn't even publish hardly anything.
Right.
But but okay. So anyway, we got to do that, and that was a great experience. But what I'm most proud of that was that I got them the concept of it. It took a while to get it off the ground, but the concept of the newsletter, the monthly newsletter.
Right. Yeah.
They didn't have a newsletter.
Right.
Just had the journal. And they wanted all that to be high literary stuff. Index Medicus, all that stuff. They wanted to get all the advertisement and the fun and games out of their birthdays and whatever it was, all that stuff. And that's where it fits in the newsletter.
Right, yeah.
The newsletter has all that and all the scientific documents.
And now the newsletter's that's where the newsletter's going now.
It's even more. But at the time, Otho Davis was in charge of that. And so we created that image and got that established. So at least that was something I'm kind of proud that we were able to do this. Somebody would have thought of that, but it didn't. And probably my most thing, the most that I'm most proud about is being able to create a summer workshop for high school students.
Yeah.
Nobody had ever done that, and I went to Otho Davis, because all we had in those days were those 1 day or a day and a half clinics.
Where you had the home study course from Cramer.
And you had the Cramer course, the 6-day course, type of thing, or 6-week course, whatever it was. But that was it. And when I remember the one I went to with Mel Blinckenstaff, those guys at Kent, I thought that's just a taste of that. So guess what? When I went to Miami, one of my jobs right at the beginning, he says, "Well, you're going to cover the basketball camp over here," and it was off campus. Now it's part of their campus, but they had a little college across the street. And that's where they went, and I went over there, and I'd never been part of a camp. It was back in '69 or something like that. And I'm during the day, they got 100 and some kids all running around, blisters and sprained ankles, and had a dislocated kneecap once, and a couple of things. But at the end of the day, all the kids went to this dorm, and they went to bed, and the coaches sat down and had pizza and beer down in the middle, talking X's and O's. And I'm staff, so I'm sitting there, and I'm bored as hell about basketball strategy. And I'm tired after being outside running around all day. Yeah. But it occurred to me, why can't we do that with athletic training people? Us 3, and a bunch of students, have them come in there and they just pick our brains, and we throw some stuff out. So I went to Otho and I said, I don't know why I didn't talk to Al. I don't know if it did or not, but I remember asking Otho straight on, what do you think about that? He goes, it'll never work. And I wanted him to say it would work, and he did. He said, no, it wouldn't work. I said, I don't know why it wouldn't work. Why you can't get those kids? They won't come down there anyway. So I went to the athletic director, and I said, what about this idea? And he goes, oh, no, the vice president of business, he didn't want all these kids hanging around in the summer and all stuff. All these kids, how many is it going to be? Yeah. So he says no. But I had one of the assistant coaches and wrestling coach, and later on he became a great coach around, especially, he was in several NFL teams, but he was head coach at Canadian football, a few places. He won a championship. His name was Joe Galat. Now, Joe Galat now runs the American youth sports, football youth sports thing. So it's a national thing all over the country. But at that day, he had a camp called Camp America, just outside of Oxford. And he and I were really friendly. He came from Northern Ohio, up near where Kirtland was, and he was a great Miami football player. He's in the Hall of Fame. We know a lot of things. And I said, my dilemma, I said, I want to try this, but I can't do it. So let's do it out here at the camp. Well, Camp America. Really? Well, yeah, we don't have, we have some places, dorms, place like that. We have, we didn't have any place for it. We had picnic tables and places to eat outside.
Right.
But, all right, so I sent out a flyer, mailed it all around, and we got 22 kids came to the camp. Just flyers. A couple from Indiana, Connorsville, Indiana.
Right.
A couple other places. And it was pretty good. We had fun. When it rained, we went in the bus. And they all sat in the little seats. I stood up at the front up there and lectured from the bus. And then he said, well, let's take them down. You want to take them down to the lake? Okay, you get to drive the bus. So I never drove the bus before. I got to drive the bus. I was nervous going through this. But we went, did the whole thing, had a good week. And then I went back to the athletic director and said, he proved that we could get 25 kids. And he says, but again, Divine Providence, neighbor on the other side of where we're living, he's director of summer sports, summer programs, summer school programs at Miami. Right. And I said to Bob, I'm trying to do this. Was this far-fetched? Would the university be interested in this? He goes, oh, yeah, I'm trying to build things, get people in here in the summer.
Yeah.
Really? And I said, well, okay, show me what you're doing. I showed him. And he set us up in the dorm. We had the whole thing. So I sent out a flyer again, went all the way around. We had like 110 people that second year. A lot of them from Indiana. That later on told me that they came from Indiana. I mean, the guys that are now like Mark and Mike Gilberton out of Chicago. There's a whole host of guys that have done this. And Paul Sparling from the Bengals just retired. He came 2 years, 75 and 76. Yeah. Ronnie O'Neill. I mean, there were guys, I didn't know who they were then. Later on, they said, well, what an opportunity that presented to these kids. And that's all I wanted to do was introduce them to something. They all went home with a certificate. They all went home with an NATA application. In those days, we were forcing it on everybody. And then it just grew for 12, 13 years. It got as high as 300 or 400 people. And it was almost too much. It got to be when I left Miami, I was glad to leave it on Gail and Pat's lap because, it took over. Yeah. And it was hard to juggle because you were going to have medium, beginning, intermediate, advanced. Right. And then we got into graduate students. We had coaches coming in there. We had people coming from other places. And then we got graduate credit. Undergraduate credit, it just got too complicated. Right. But it was the first one. We got Cramer, Hugh Grubus, helped me. I said, I need a little seed money. And they hadn't tried it yet. They were thinking about it. And they said, well, we'll give you that because we want to see how this will go. And so it went pretty well that second year. It was 109 and went up to 200 after that. And he gave us some money because the university was like, we don't have too much invested in this stuff. Yeah. But he was nice enough in products, and we got J&J, and we got some of these other people. But it proved. And then, of course, everybody jumped on the bandwagon. Cramer decided that they would get into it. All these other schools individual ones, I'm sure Ball State did that. Yeah. I never got Bud over for that, but I got Pinky Newell over a couple of times because he was always interested in things that we were doing.
I am an alumni of a Cramer workshop. I went to East Kentucky and Illinois State for beginning. I went to East Kentucky with Dr. Barton. With Bobby. Yeah. And then I went to Illinois State with Kathy. And that's what got me in athletic training. Because my high school, we had a team doctor, but they didn't have an athletic trainer. And they said, well, we want to have something there. Well, we're going to send you they sent me and another guy to Cramer camp. And for me, the rest was history. Because that's how I got started. And guess who was the first guy I met at East Kentucky in 1983, the guy that was running that camp was a guy named Jim Dickerson.
Oh, he was.
Yep. And he told and so Jim was from the same area. He was from Boone County, and he was from kind of a similar area. And my mom, I was 13 years old between my 8th grade and freshman year, youngest kid at the camp. And my mom and dad were kind of concerned. And Jim said, "You're from Boone County. I got this. I'm not going to let anything happen to him." And there was all sorts of shenanigans going on during that. At one point in time, there was some kid that got taped to a chair in his underwear out in the hallway. There was all sorts of crazy stuff going on, but nobody touched me. Nobody teased me. Nobody harassed me. Nobody did anything to me. And because of that experience, that's what led me to here. And Jim was tremendous. And I didn't know it at the time because I didn't know any better. But then when I came to Ball State, here's Jim. And I go, "I remember you." He goes, "How do you remember me?" And I said, you were 1983 at East Kentucky University at a Cramer camp. So you're the reason I'm here.
Huh.
It's now come full circle.
Yeah.
because if you had not developed those camps, there's no way I'd had an opportunity to go to a camp. And that's what this is. And that's why I did the Ball State camps. Was for 9 years there. I mean, that's why we did them. 1 year at Indiana State. So I did them 10 years total. So I did them a year at Indiana State, which was more of a commuter camp. But then when I came here and CIO wanted to know what could we do to get the high schools involved, I said, "This is my idea." And then Neil let me run with it for all those years. Mm-hmm. And now we've got kids that have come out of those Ball State camps that are out there in the high schools that have graduated from the program, that have all alumni from those Ball State camps. So yeah, your legacy, starting way back at Miami, has come all the way around here now.
I can't understand to this day why Otho would have vetoed that. He was one of my heroes. And I was so disappointed in that. He says, "But I feel I have to try it. Why can't we try it and lose? If we lose, what do we? We didn't lose anything at all. Just some effort." But it was the greatest thing because the kids were so enthusiastic. You were part of that. You saw those people with you. You've seen them to this day.
Right.
They still do that. And like I say, Paul Sparling, he says, "When I saw you guys interacting and all the fun and the different people that we had," because I just had all my friends come.
Right.
The bigger it got, the more people I could get.
Yeah.
I didn't make any money. I was only allowed to take a little bit, but I could pay you, $50 a day to come, which is good for you. Nobody ever paid us that for anything we do.
Right.
But it would be good for you. You get free food. I had as much beer as possible there. I forget how many kegs I would buy in a week. We put them in a bathtub in one of the dorm rooms, and I had as much lunch meat and food from. I could spend the money. I couldn't spend it on myself, but I could spend it on all the rest of the people and buy shirts and certificates and prizes and whatever it might be, And we just had such a wonderful time. And there's a little kid. My favorite guy, his name is Larry Lasky. I don't know if you know that name, but Larry, he's a baseball guy. He's in Houston now, but he knows all the baseball people,
Right.
Not just Larry Starr, but he's been in the Houston organization, and he works for Dr. What's his name? The specialist orthopedic. I'm forgetting so many names. It used to be.
Not Andrews.
Andrews.
Okay.
Andrews has a clinic in
Houston.
Houston.
Yeah.
He works for that as an outreach, and he's into everything. Larry is a great guy. Guess what? Larry was a Tampa, Florida high school's trainer in Plant High School, and he saw this brochure, and he said, "I'm going to that thing." He got on a Greyhound bus.
Oh my
and
goodness.
He went from Tampa all the way to Cincinnati. We picked him up, put him back on the bus, and he went home. When he was like a junior in high school.
Yeah.
And he's a little guy, bravest guy I could ever imagine.
Yeah.
I talk to him every day. And he's just, he just loved that opportunity.
Right.
I mean, he became a graduate assistant of Ron Riberick at Central Florida later after undergraduate. I think he went undergraduate at Auburn, and he was part of a good program there.
Which is probably the Dr. Andrews connection. Yeah.
That may be.
Yeah.
So now he's been there, but he was in that organization, like the minor leagues. And so he never became the head trainer for Houston, but he was moved up into the ranks, and then he got off into this other area. But these people who had a great experience, that was all we were looking for. To give those coaches, because we would talk to the coach and the athletic director, take them home, here's a little thing for them to take with them. This is what I learned this year. This is what I can do now. These are my skills. And the football coach will go, well, yeah, welcome, come on in here.
Right.
And then we'll come back again. The second, third, we had some people 4 years that would keep coming back. And we couldn't find enough stuff for them. What work could we be teaching them now? How many advanced levels do we have here? Or maybe they'd help us teach. But it was more gratifying than probably, other than our experience with the World Games for the Deaf. I mean, I worked with those guys for like 3 different Olympiads. And 77 was Romania, and then it was West Germany, and then it was Los Angeles. But the deaf Olympic teams, it was a small scale Olympic thing, but they had all the sports, but they were all deaf, and including most of the coaches. And so Ed Crispin and I were in that. I got him to come along because somebody asked me that I knew from Ohio University. There was a track guy who was partially deaf. And he thought that maybe I'd like to do this. And anyway, I got involved in it. It was so special working with these kids. They couldn't even hear what they're saying, but they were talking in sign language through the buses, outside the buses, and everybody understand what they were saying except me. Because I had poor sign skills. But those people were the same groups that were happy and satisfied and grateful for what you did for them.
Right.
Because they didn't all come from places that had good. Gallaudet College, maybe a few places, but not too much. And that's the only satisfaction we would get is when somebody you knew they appreciated, you gave them a little better result from what their efforts were. That they're trying hard to be a winner, to be successful, and you're just aiding them along. And if they said a little bit of thanks for that, what more can you be? But when it became to the point where that wasn't enough, you could never do enough. That's what turned me off on the whole thing. And that's why I looked in other directions. I'm not going to spend 50 years just being beat down by these people, these greedy coaches, in many cases, who want more and more and more. Never satisfied. One of the most satisfying coaches that I ever worked with, and it was a small amount, was thanks to you, Brady Hoke. I don't know how he was in the trenches because I didn't work with him. But from the outside, just being somebody, I think his dad went to Miami and played, and so he had a Miami connection. He was from Dayton, and he went here to school, and we just had a great common denominator. And there's few coaches that I really respected that way. But again, if I was working with them on a day-to-day basis, it might have been tougher. I don't know, but I did. That was another plus from the Ball State family. Did you guys know Dave Costel?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, Dave Costel was on my advisory board for our sports medicine clinic over in Hamilton. Okay. He was way over here. Right. But we stuck him on there because I'd known him through our orthopedic surgeon, one of the orthopedic surgeons played football with him in high school up in Cuyahoga Falls, Ohio. Right. And so where Dave came from. So we just it seemed like everywhere I turned, there was a connection with Ball State. Yeah. And yet you weren't in the conference at the beginning when I started. It was, and yet I think in that, it might have been the 1973. That was the best team Miami ever had. It was undefeated. It was a great team. But the closest game they had that year was against Ball State. Yeah. And yet that's the one they're going to be honoring next week for 50 years of celebration of the big, and it's going into the Hall of Fame over there. Is the first team to be so honored. Oh wow! So, but it was Ball State came very close, and whoever your coach was, I forget what his name was, but
McLean. Then.
It's Dave McLean.
Yeah, good. Oh, he was like a solid. Those guys were. He was on that level of coaches that. Were one of the greater coaches of all time. In my mind, I didn't know him at all, really.
Yeah. Well, we got to wrap this up because we're going on a little over 2 hours right now. Yeah. So that's. But it's been awesome. This has been great. It's been tremendously awesome, and again, I can't thank you enough for the proud. If that's the proudest thing that you've done, just know that your summer workshop was very far-reaching. And now even into the 2000s with kids that have gone through a summer workshop. And so your vision, whether Otho Davis appreciated it or not, it was very impactful. And I think there's a lot that could be said in the aspect of athletic trainers that are out there practicing right now that went through some summer workshop, Cramer or whatever, Northern Illinois. I mean, I know Phil's been doing that for almost 38 years. I mean, so your idea is very far reaching, and I can't thank you enough for that. So thanks for doing the podcast, Ken. I really appreciate it. And, maybe sometime we can have a group one. That would be good to have a group one. Yeah. With maybe we can get Snowball and Sindri and something like that you guys can talk about old days with that. Cause obviously you would see Sindri in the MAC at Central and Ball State. Yeah.
I saw him a lot. I see him now.
Yeah.
I see him at church.
Yeah.
And we got to get together.
Yeah.
Yeah. It is. It's been a fabulous experience. Met the greatest people.
Yeah.
Obviously, and I just feel so fortunate to be close to a Ball State family.
Yeah.
Of people that you're very much like the Miami, much like the Ohio University,
right,
and all these other places where we go. And yeah, so it's a wonderful concept having this little program, and I know you can go on and talk.
Oh no, it's going to have to be a two-parter, so that's okay. It's good.
Be old like I am, I mean, it's like. There's a lot of things to draw back on.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I'm
glad I can still remember some of it.
No, you were awesome. You're awesome.
Yeah. So it goes on and on. But good luck with the future.
Oh yeah. You're kicking me off pretty good here, so it's good.
Good. How does one find out about this?
Well, you can go to. We'll put this on there. This will be on my exit too, but there's a Spotify or Google Podcasts or Apple Podcasts. It's all on all those platforms and stuff. So we'll get you hooked into that. So
okay. Well, good. Well, thanks for you guys for coming out today. Neil, it's always great to see you.
Yeah. I'm glad that Neil could come out too. So
likewise. Thanks for letting me be part of it.
Yeah.
Well, you've made us feel at home here from day one. There's no doubt about that. Yeah. Now we get to see your family participating in some of the children weren't even born when we came.
That's right.
And now we're rooting for them. For crying out loud.
All right. So we're going to wrap it up. I want to thank Ken for being on the podcast. So we've gone off the roll with Ken Wolfert. I want to thank Ken for doing the podcast. Again, to sit down and kind of talk about your career for over 2 hours. That takes a lot of mental Olympics to do, and he did absolutely phenomenal. And so I want to say thanks to Ken and Pat for as she termed it, being quiet in the kitchen with that. It was great to sit down and talk to him, especially since I had not heard his entire story. It was very interesting to see him make the connections between a lot of Hall of Famers, and I talked about that in the intro, how important that is. So I love to keep doing these. I love to keep telling people stories, and hopefully you'll keep listening to them as we do these. So you can give us some feedback on offtherollpodcast@gmail.com, or you can DM me on Twitter or X at offrollpod1 at twitter.com. And you can always reach out to me on my personal Facebook page. Just if you don't know what it is, just do a search and you'll find it, and give me some feedback there. You can DM me there as well. So we'll keep doing these. Hopefully we'll have another one here in 2 weeks, and I've got some guests in mind that I want to ask to do that. So hopefully we can continue on with that. We hope you enjoyed this. Have a great day.